Just to wrap up a bit on COVID-19, you were seeing that in response to questions, the Secretary General said that very important measures are being taken here at UN headquarters, and the situation is being assessed on a daily, if not hourly, basis. He also expressed his total commitment to cooperate with the authorities of the host country, as well as the state and city authorities, to be part of the efforts here in New York to keep everyone safe. Yesterday, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies issued new guidance to protect children in schools from the transmission of COVID-19. The guidance provides critical consideration and practical checklists to keep schools safe, as well as advice from national and local authorities on how to adapt and implement emergency plans for school. We do expect Dr. Tedros to brief the press in Geneva, if he hasn't already done so, very shortly. Also on WHO, but on Syria, the World Health Organization, in a statement today, condemns in the strongest terms the attacks on healthcare that have been a hallmark of the complex humanitarian situation in Syria, which this month enters its 10th year. A total of 494 attacks on healthcare workers and installations were confirmed between 2016 and 2019, of which more than two-thirds, or 337 attacks, were recorded in Syria's northwest. The data shows that attacks on health in Syria peaked in 2016 and were the lowest last year in 2019, likely due to a reduced size of the area where active fighting has been taking place. The total death toll on healthcare in Syria between 2016 and 19 is 470. We continue to be deeply concerned for the safety and protection of millions of civilians in the northwest of Syria following more than 3 months of violence in the area. We're continuing to scale up our response, including protection, shelter, water, sanitation, and hygiene. The UN sent 927 trucks in February and 1,227 in January from the cross-border, carrying in life-saving assistance for millions of people in the Northwest. The UN urges all parties to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure in line with obligations under international humanitarian law, and to ensure the safe and sustained humanitarian access to people affected by the crisis. Back here, the Security Council is holding a meeting on countering terrorism and extremism in Africa. Briefing council members for the Secretariat was Under Secretary General for Political Affairs Rosemary DiCarlo. She said that today Africa is moving forward with its own agenda of progress, peace, and prosperity. But she said the continent continues to see the threat of terrorism and violent extremism, which continues to grow in some areas despite our efforts to prevent and counter it at the national, regional, and international levels. She added that, as the Secretary General stated, we cannot address terrorism without addressing the underlying factors. She also said that we must address poverty, weak governance, intercommunal tensions, gender inequality, youth unemployment, illicit activities such as the trafficking in weapons and people, and the use of new technologies and social media to recruit, inflame, and incite. The humanitarian situation in Mali continues to deteriorate due to an escalation of violence, particularly in the northern, eastern, and central regions. That's according to the Office of Humanitarian Affairs. As of today, more than 86,000 people have been displaced in the Mopti region since 2018, bringing the total number of displaced to 218,500 across Mali. With the spread of hostilities at the center of the country, there are about 8.7 million people, or 45% of the country's population, are now impacted by the crisis. The humanitarian response plan for this year targets 3.6 million and requires $390 million in funding. And this update from the Central African Republic, where peacekeeping mission there reports that the security situation in Ndele in Bamimingi, Bangoran Prefecture continues to be tense. Heavy gunfire was reported today after fighting between factions of the FPRC. At least 13 combatants were killed, and there's an unconfirmed number of injured. The number of civilians seeking security around the UN mission camp has now increased to 3,000. The mission reports that peacekeepers are actively patrolling and securing key areas in the city, and that all UN personnel are safe. And let's have a little bit of good news. We say thank you to our friends in South Africa and Spain, who have paid up in full to the regular budget, bringing up to 68. Maggie.
Steph, on COVID watch, you said hourly and daily changing. Can you tell us how, if there's, I asked you about it Monday, I believe, but can you tell us if there's been any change to the impact on your operations from the spread of the virus? Worldwide, not just here, I mean.
No, exactly. I mean, just here, the President of the General Assembly, the Bureau of ECOSOC are all, I think, in discussions looking at the calendar of conferences, a number of, I think, already being altered or postponed, including the biodiversity conference, as far as I know, as well as parts of the programs of the Indigenous Forum. Various headquarter stations, whether it's in Geneva, or Vienna, are also taking measures that are specific to those headquarters. On the humanitarian front, the agencies are assessing how and where humanitarian operations are being disrupted to try to identify solutions as quickly as possible. To date, and again, I'd have to stress to date, the UN and all of our humanitarian partners are maintaining humanitarian operations while taking the utmost precautions to ensure staff safety. UN agencies are also currently assessing where and how humanitarian operations are being disrupted. And we're also constantly balancing the need to continue, obviously, the UN's critical work in the field with the requirement to protect public health.
And one follow-up. In the UN community, last night it was confirmed that a teacher at UNICEF had tested positive, and the school's now closed until after spring break. Has there been any directive or recommendation to parents of kids at UNICEF who work in headquarters to self-quarantine?
I think the school put out an email yesterday which had some direct messaging from the city's Department of Health on precautions that should be taken.
But has the UN asked staff here who have children at the school to work from home?
I mean, we're encouraging, as a general rule, telecommuting in order to reduce the footprint, and staff and communications to staff will be ongoing. Joe.
Yes, I want to go back to the recent meeting between the Secretary General and the Secretary of State Pompeo, and I have two questions flowing from that. As you know, one of the topics that was discussed, at least according to the State Department readout, was the so-called blacklist of firms doing business with Israeli firms in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. I'm wondering what specifically the Secretary General is doing in response to that, and I have in mind what impact will it have on UN procurement from those businesses listed on that blacklist. My second question is, in the readout that your office provided, there was a reference to the host country agreement. Didn't go into any details. I'm just wondering whether the issue of potentially barring the issuance of visas to the ICC prosecutor, and whose visa I believe was revoked last year, and also investigatory staff, was that specifically discussed?
Not that I'm aware. And I think we all have to double check exactly what happened with the visa of the ICC prosecutor. As you know, there has been an issue which we have raised publicly and privately with the issuance of visas for certain delegations who want to work here at the UN. I can only speak to the readout we put out. In terms of the list, as we've always said in the past, this was a decision taken by this was a mandate given to the High Commissioner for Human Rights by the Council. She acted on that mandate as any UN Secretariat official there. She has no choice but to act on the mandate. And I have nothing further on the list as of now.
I think in conjunction with the discussion surrounding the issuance of the list, it was partly for the purpose, at least that's stated at the time, to impact on the procurement decisions of the UN and potentially other member states. So I'm just wondering whether any deliberations are underway, to your knowledge, within the Secretariat governing procurement from those listed businesses.
Not to my knowledge, which is sometimes rather limited. Yes, sir, Mr. Gladstone.
Hi, thank you. Forgive me if this has been asked before. Has Secretary General Gutierrez or any other members of the hierarchy been tested for coronavirus?
No, Secretary General has not been tested. You know, we are following the recommendations of the local health authorities, and we have the UN does not have tests. We do not have the capacity or the capability to conduct tests. We would rely on the New York City, state, and federal authorities.
One other quick follow-up. Do you have like a percentage of the number of people at the Secretariat, or I should say the people who work here at the UN headquarters, how many percentage-wise are not coming to work out of an abundance of caution? We
had aimed for 40 to 50% reduction in the footprint. I think we'll have to figure out. It'll take a couple of days to get the figures of where we are. The directive went out earlier in the week. Obviously, in order for people to telecommute, we have to make sure they have the right tools, IT tools, and so forth, so they're able to do their work fully. But we'll try to harvest some numbers on that. Ms. Lederer. Oh, sorry, and then.
Thank you, Steph. Have there been any cases reported at UN headquarters? We know about Eunice, but I mean in the headquarters complex, and also as a follow-up to the last question. We know that there was a simulation of how the Security Council might operate if UN headquarters closed. Has anything similar been done about how the Secretariat and the Secretary General would operate?
Well, first of all, let me say I've not been made aware that any case of COVID-19 has been reported to Secretariat staff. Obviously, we're all on heightened alert. If that changes, I will advise you. There is a pretty robust business continuity plan in place, which was really triggered a few years ago after the events of Hurricane Sandy. If you'll remember, the garage was flooded. We lost a lot of our IT, and I think that really pushed the Secretariat to see how we could operate remotely. All departments now have one. All departments have been asked to test it. I'm sure they all have. We, for instance, in our office are now working, about half the staff is working from home. We have the capacity to do press briefings from my living room remotely. In fact, we've been in touch with Anka to figure out how you would participate in those briefings. So we're all ready and ready for something that we hope will not happen. Evelyn.
Thank you. On Syria, is there any update on the ceasefire?
No, I have nothing new from that, Madame, and then.
Hi, is there anything concrete, like a document that's online somewhere on the business continuity plan?
No, I mean the business continuity plan are not public documents.
Okay.
I mean it's basically to make sure that each office knows what they would have to do, who would work from where, the tools they need, phone trees. I mean just the basic business continuity plan, as I'm sure most of you in your news organizations have for a time of crisis.
Thanks, Harvey Weinstein. 23 years. What does the SG's gender justice team make of that?
I think what we've always said is that there needs to be accountability for violence against women. There needs to be accountability for sexual violence, and we've seen the New York City, the New York judicial system play out. We don't. It's not for us to comment on court decisions, but I think, as we've said, when the conviction the guilty verdict came through, that this was indeed a turning point.
Does the UN have any sense of how whether the virus is affecting at all the population in North Korea? And are there any steps in place?
No, I do not. I do not hear. It may be something you want to check with WHO. I'll see if I can find out. Maggie.
On your business continuity plan, is there any scenario under which you see this building closing? And who's in charge? Is there like some ASG, USG in charge of overseeing all of this?
Yeah, I mean, the Secretary General serves as the chief administrative officer of this building. So obviously, the decision would be made in his name. There is a medical director who has also a specific role to play. We will be guided by recommendations from the New York City Health Department and other local authorities. I think we want to, like any other institution in this city, we want to make sure to keep everyone safe. We also don't want to feed any panic. And I think all these decisions need to be made on sound scientific and medical advice.
Also, I'm hearing now that from my colleagues outside the room that this has been raised to a pandemic level by the WHO. Do you have any reaction?
I mean, it's the WHO's decision to do that. It's their responsibility and decision to do that. This may have an impact on some of the decisions that are taken here, but we'll be updating you on that. Yep.
Different subject. Joe Biden and Antonio Gutierrez. They've both been in the business for a long time. Do you know if they've got any history together, meetings? Have they ever cooperated on any projects?
I do not know. Sir, Mr. Roth, and then Zach. Yeah.
Well, Maggie asked my pandemic question. I mean, it's a word you don't hear often. Do you know if the UN system, how many times a pandemic has been declared in any UN operation or in field offices?
The declaration of a pandemic is the responsibility of the World Health Organization. How many times they've done that, I do not know off the top of my head, but I'm sure that's something that some of your colleagues in Geneva may be asking Dr. Tedros. Zach.
Thanks, Stéphane. You mentioned Syria. We've reached almost a 10-year mark entering its 10th year. Several special envoys to Syria to try to resolve the conflict. Has the Secretary General come with a sort of assessment of how well the UN has done to help resolve the conflict after 9 years?
Well, it depends what part of the UN you're talking about. Right? I mean, we understand. We can all observe the situation in the Security Council. For the part of the Secretariat, for the Secretary General, we have done whatever we can on the ground to try to deliver humanitarian aid, to try to relieve the suffering of the people of Syria. We have also never given up on the political track through our various envoys, whether it was Mr. Annan, Mr. Brahimi, Mr. de Mistura, Mr. Pedersen. They have never lost hope. This organization will continue to push for a political process and will also continue to try to do whatever feasibly can to get humanitarian aid in. What we need to see is greater unity on the part of the Security Council, and we need to see those who have their finger on the trigger stop shooting, stop bombing, stop airstrikes, and those who have an influence on those parties to push them in that direction. Yep.
This question literally is the type Evelyn always calls a housekeeping question, and maybe you've announced this over the last week and a half, so I apologize. Has the
I only do light housekeeping.
Though you are an expert in North American elevators.
Yes.
Escalators.
Escalators, yes.
Has the UN system, however meager, regarding cleaning of the building, and many of these reporter offices are,
yes, we've
are locked,
increased,
so how do they get in there?
Sorry,
Okay.
I shall give you the consideration to finish your question before I answer it.
Many of the journalism offices are locked, and I don't think the cleaning staff has access. So, how much deep cleaning?
Well, we have noticeably increased the overnight staff to clean all public surfaces, elevators, escalators, doors. More staff have been hired. They have upgraded the cleaning fluid disinfectant fluid to what is being referred to as hospital grade in order to try to keep this building clean. There are a number of hand sanitizing stations that have been added that are being refilled as quickly as possible. So we're very, very much focused on the cleanliness of this building. As for the cleanliness of your individual offices, I think that's a question to raise with our colleagues in Malu. I will not go there given our history. Rick.
Yeah, I have a follow-up to Maggie's question. Have there been discussions among your senior staff, Mr. Gutierrez, about what it would take to completely close down the UN headquarters?
There have been discussions of what would happen, obviously, and what we would need to do to keep the building going. And there have been discussions as well as to what events would trigger it.
What would those events be?
I'm not going to go into those details.
And forgive me, one other quick follow-up. Has the UN headquarters ever completely shut down, ever?
It shut down after 9/11. I'm all for community-based answers, but let me try it first. And if it doesn't work with me, I'm always welcome to your input. It shut down a short while after 9/11, as it did after Hurricane Sandy. And then obviously snowstorms once in a while when we still used to have snowstorms in the city. Yes, sir.
One more teeny-weeny housekeeping. Were we going to have Mark Lowcock today, and has that been rescheduled?
Yes, that's being rescheduled for a time to be scheduled later. Maggie. But thank you for remembering.
Steph, I'm really sorry to ask you about
okay.
this, and I do it with great reluctance. But there was, it's come to our attention that one of the officers from the Department of Safety and Security died tragically earlier this week at his home. Mm-hmm. But there have been a lot of rumors going around about it, and I was wondering if you had any statements.
Sure, I can. I can confirm that. Very sadly, one of our wonderful colleagues from Safety and Security fell off his building, which is on 42nd, 5th and 2nd. The NYPD is investigating, though there is absolutely no indication of any foul play. Okay, thank you.